We need to touch on that. The broke streamers. That's gold. That's gold.
All right, we're live. We've been having a blast the last little bit talking about things. Let me go do our social media while we're waiting for people to
Yep.
hang up.
Yep.
Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna be riffing on this all night tonight as we get into the other stream. Two broke streamers, just
Just another couple of broke streamers here coming at you live.
All right, we are out on Facebook, Discord, and Twitter now.
Are you in Minothill Harbor, by the way?
I am watching
All right,
the
me too.
icebreaker boat roll in.
I gotta come over to your dock. I'm on the wrong dock, man.
Are you logged in?
Yeah.
Oh, you're on Sorensen, that's why.
This is my fisherman.
Oh, that's right.
I've done no crafting or harvesting on my other guy at all.
I was originally gonna do, what's it called? Inscribing, and I had started to level up herbalism, but I couldn't find any herbs anywhere, so I got tired and gave up. And now, after seeing all the amazing things you can do with engineering, I'm going to just go ahead and straight up respec once I get to 80 and do engineering. Let me fix, got a little bit of a...
I'm gonna share out these socials real quick before we get started too.
Yeah. I'm resizing the window just a smidge because there was some edging. Alright, we're good. Welcome everybody to episode 2 while we're doing the intro. If you don't know who we are, I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfill, in a room with the paint peeling off the wall. Because I know somebody commented the other day. This is what happens when you're broke, right? But also, this is what happens when you're homesteading and the last thing on your list of priorities is painting, because I have flooding issues that take up way more priority, and a chicken coop and a cat shelter and other stuff that I'm building by hand, by the way. If you check out the other YouTube channel, it's a handsaw and hammer and nails, so please
really cool design too. MMO style design, right?
Well, it was inspired by that, but there are some...
Right.
I realized as I dug into that a little bit more, that Lotro chicken coop, that whoever designed that graphically for the game was not a carpenter, because there was some shit that just doesn't work physically, and I was like, all right, it looks cool visually, but that's just not going to work that way. But it is inspired by that, and we're working on that slowly but surely. Welcome to our show. This is the second episode. I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfell, joined by Nathan Napalm. And this is Catch of the Day, where we have various topics related to tabletops, MMORPGs, RPGs, so on and so forth, while we are fishing in World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King Classic. After this stream, we roll into our multi-stream group, which is myself, Nathan, Sparrow, Entrenador, my brother, and Maduros, playing World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King with our guild, the Raven Syndicate. You can join us. We are full-time... Well, I don't always say full-time, but we are maining. It is the main MMORPG for us right now is Wrath of the Lich King. We're going to be raiding by the end of October is the plan. We've got over 200 people in the guild. It's growing every day, so if you want to join us, we're on the Pagels server. On the Alliance side, feel free to come join us. And as we get into this episode, we're going to be riffing off of a video. I mean, I got a list of like 30 topics we can choose from, but this one, Nathan did a video on his channel 2 or 3 days ago, I think. Called Old School MMOs, Can They Survive? And it was a really good topic that I figured we could just continue riffing on today for the topic of this Catch of the Day episode and go into that. So if you're here watching this live on Twitch every Thursday at 6 p.m. Central is when we do this, drop your comments below. Go ahead and hang out, have conversations. Let us know your thoughts on the topics. Feel free to bring up other topics that you would like to see us talk about. We'll add them to the list. As always, if you want to support, it's really simple. You can follow along here on Twitch. You can also drop a subscription if you want to support us. This is a partnership with myself, Nathan, my brother, my wife, Chris, Bounty Code, Sparrow, and Skinny. You can also catch us live every Sunday night as we play through The World of the Weave and the Void, which is our 5th edition campaign, on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Central. I do map making every Monday at 1 p.m. here on the Twitch channel. And if you're watching this after the fact, over on the YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Follow everybody's links below. And now I'll shut up. And why don't you go ahead and give us your intro into the episode that you had done the other day, Nathan.
Yeah, so I thought it was an interesting topic, which is, like, can a new old school MMO, like, and what I mean by that, of course, is an MMO that is inspired by and tries to recreate the feelings and/or gameplay mechanics of an old school MMO. Can that survive? Is that a viable subgenre of the MMO industry to do? Um, and so yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to explore in the video, because we got a lot of it going on. We got a lot of them in the works. Some of them have already come out. I don't feel we've gotten a fully fledged MMORPG out of them yet, but there's a lot of them, down the pipeline.
I think one of the most interesting things to me, and this might be the place where we diverge a little bit, you and I, on opinions, is whether or not old school mechanics can actually not. I think for me, it's less about can they survive, and more about can they thrive. Because
Sure.
I think that these companies can absolutely survive, but the thriving part is the great concern that I have. Because,
Okay.
and I wanted to bring this up because I had mentioned it in the comment section of your video. I can talk about this a little bit because it's not really NDA um, stuff, because all of my data was pulled from public sources, and just
Sure.
by talking to different companies and getting their insight and people who were willing to share numbers with me. So when I was doing the investor pitching for the Saga Leucemia for Stormhaven Studios, when we were talking to companies who were looking to achieve something around the same size as what we were looking to achieve, or had something similar to the product that we had, the general consensus was that selling 100,000 copies was more than likely an achievable feat for an old school MMORPG. But anything beyond 100,000 copies was going to be a stretch. Quite possibly an impossibility unless you had some sort of celebrity status associated with you. Then when you started to look at games that did have celebrity behind them, such as Crowfall or Richard Garriott's Shroud of the Avatar, even with the celebrity status that those individuals had, their games were still not able to sell much more than 110,000 copies, 120,000 copies,
Sounds
which
right.
in the grand scheme of things is still a good amount of sales. We're talking on a $60 box price. We're talking $6 million in gross sales, plus the money they brought in through crowdfunding and etc. I believe at the end of the day, Shroud of the Avatar was in the $15 million ballpark.
Yep.
Whereas Crowfall, I believe, was over 50 million, but they also did a lot of investments due to their engine that they were building, and they were promoting a secondary game that they were developing, not just Crowfall as well. So there were other factors with Crowfall that led to that much higher number.
Yeah.
But the thriving component is what I look at, because you can survive on 100,000 sales because you're going to get that 10 to 15. Let's say you get 15%, which is an abnormally high amount.
That'd be great.
That's
Yeah.
abnormally high to retain 15%. Like that's unicorn numbers. And
Yeah.
so far there aren't a lot of games that get unicorn numbers. So when I was talking to investors, there was a lot of pushback on anytime you would start discussing retention above 10%. We would get the pushback of, well, that's just not realistic, this, that, or the other. And so I think that that's something that people have to factor in. And also, anytime we started to pitch the idea of, the game doing beyond 100,000 in sales, that was when we're talking, okay, that's possible, yes, but you're talking unicorn scenario, and unfortunately, what you're building is highly unlikely to be unicorn because of the fact that it is building off of a base that is similar to so many things that have come before. And even though you are doing unique things, you aren't pushing the genre in different directions. You aren't building a new genre. So I would say one of the reasons that Fortnite, as an example, was able to do so well was because it was something different. It was the Battle Royale, which was a brand new genre, which was something that had never been done before. So it got obscene numbers, not because it was necessarily the greatest game ever, but because it was something new that appealed to a lot of people, and that's something that old school MMORPGs don't have working in their favor, because they are dealing with, hey, we want to go back to the basics and sort of rebuild some of the things that worked before, while also adding some modernity to it. So,
Right.
from my perspective, regardless of what game we're talking about, getting to 100,000 sales is possible, very difficult without any sort of celebrity name attached. Going beyond 100,000 is, I would argue, going to be an impossibility unless you can get the Asmongols of the world interested in your game, and I want to continue on that line of thinking later, but I'll shut up now and let you'll have some counters to what I was just talking about, and so on and so forth.
No, I agree with everything you said. I think that that's probably, I would assume, any realistic developers, what they would probably want and consider to be good for what they're doing. Did we lose the stream?
We may have. I'm recording, so
Okay. So I think you're dead on about all of it. I do think that we maybe are entering a slightly different age over the past 3 years that might affect that a little, well, a significant amount. In that it's been proven now that some of the older flavors are very likable by a bigger market than I think people thought it would be. The two examples of that would be World of Warcraft Classic, where it just completely blew all expectations out of the water. Now, like I said in my video, and I'll say it here again, though, World of Warcraft Classic is also based on 4 to 6 million people who played it during these eras, right? So they got a baked in audience for Warcraft Classic, where it's just this massive amount of people get to go back and relive their favorite eras of the game. So that's a little bit different for a new MMO. Can't really capture that. But another great example, and this is wild, is old school RuneScape. It's actually more popular than classic World of Warcraft.
what are the
Um,
numbers on old school RuneScape? Because I know I started seeing them promote fresh servers, which is something they took,
yeah,
I think, from World of Warcraft.
sure.
Do you know numbers on old school RuneScape?
I don't know the exact numbers. The way that you can tell that it's obviously more popular is because people who play a game are going to be Googling things for that game, right? And if you compare old school RuneScape Googles to even just WoW, you only have to add in the classic, just World of Warcraft. So that would include classic and regular Google searches. It's almost not even comparable. It's just off the charts. It makes World of Warcraft look like it's not even a popular game with how much higher old school RuneScape is getting searched. And on top of that, I mean, their servers are just packed to the gills, and there's actually way more content creators for it. I mean, every angle you look at, from, because they're not going to release numbers, neither classic nor old school RuneScape, but it's pretty apparent that it is way more popular, which is nuts. I would have never thought that. I'm not a RuneScape guy, so
I know my brother has played RuneScape in the past. I've never done it either. It's just never appealed to me. I've heard that it's got some old school mechanics that I might enjoy, but
it's got
one
some
of the,
really old school mechanics.
I know there was a hiccup in the stream, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure what happened there with the upload. We seem to be back now, but I am recording this, so if you missed a section, it'll be up on the YouTube when we get up the uploaded version. One of the things that Nathan had tapped into, and I think this is it. Like, we can look at the success of World of Warcraft Classic. I like the fact that Nathan did add this into the equation, though. One of the reasons for World of Warcraft's success was the baked-in
Sure.
audience that it already had from years ago. Because, I mean, I think at the time of Wrath, it was not the biggest the game had ever been. I think it was up around 10 million active subscribers when Wrath was out, and then it got up to 12 million active subscribers when Cataclysm was out.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
if we factor in that there were 10 million paying subscribers for Wrath of the Lich King, even if we're only pulling in 5% of that, you're still getting 500,000 people who are willing to pay $15 a month to come out and play. And we know that the numbers are way more than that. Again, no confirmation of anything. I've heard the numbers for Classic are around 3 million to somewhere in that ballpark. I don't know if that's active actually or not, but that's what I've heard. Based on what the estimates people are making on server times and queues on the fresh start servers versus the old servers and everything else, and being able to do calculation estimations. So seeing 3 million, that's a 30%. If that's true, that's a 30% return on your original people who are. And remember, these people, more than likely, most of them paid a box price for this game back in the day. And this time around, they're coming back and just being willing to do it for a monthly sub, which is still pretty awesome in the grand scope of things, because you're getting them to pay twice. Skyrim, special edition, Halloween edition, Christmas edition, special edition, fishing edition, holograph edition, VR edition. If you can get your customers to double dip, that's never going to be never going to be a bad thing. But the World of Warcraft Classic thing, I would say that yes, it does prove that people enjoy a certain component of old school gameplay. Whether or not that can translate to a new game is something that has yet to be determined, because we do have the baked-in audience for Warcraft, along with the fact that we just have a franchise that's known, and this was the expansion that was like one of the best known expansions of all time, even if it wasn't necessarily the biggest or best expansion of all time. I'm watching the stream just dipped out again for some odd reason, Nathan. I don't know why it's doing that today.
Yeah, it looks like it closed.
There have been storms all over the place, and I don't know what servers they're trying to connect to. So if you can give me a second, I'm going to just reconnect to instead of doing the automatic Twitch server.
Okay.
I'm gonna connect to like the US or something, like US Central or something, and see what it does. All right, folks, we're back. Sorry about that. It may be because of the hurricanes that are happening. I was using the automatic server. I switched it over to US Central Houston, so fingers crossed. I apologize for the stream dipping around in there. It is what it is. Sometimes the automatic works great, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, we're back. Talking about the baked-in audience with World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think really all it proved realistically was that even though Retail WoW still technically had the content for the most part that was in Classic, and there's a difference because the content did change in Cataclysm, but it was pretty close. You know what I mean? Like as far as the quests go and the dungeons and everything, I mean it was pretty close, but the mechanics in the game had changed so much since then. The way that you leveled up, how fast you leveled up, etc. That Blizzard as a company was looking at it like, no way would people want to go back and do that, right? We made it simpler, we made it more accessible. Why would they want to go back and play it in a harder, more difficult, worse graphics? Like, no way. And that's where the comment came from of like, you think you want it, but you don't, right? And from their perspective, that made sense. You know what I mean? And they're like, and I mean, we're offering time walking in retail, so you can go back and redo raids. And like, why would you want to go back and do that? But it actually turned out that there was a demand, because as soon as Classic hit, it was a huge success. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't for Classic, with all the fallout that happened with the company Blizzard and all the drama there, they would have been hurting. Classic kind of kept them rolling, and then TBC, and now I'm sure it's getting its largest kick now because we're on Wrath of the Lich King, most people's favorite expansion. So I think what it did teach was that people do like it to be a little more difficult. It's not all about accessibility. Sometimes that accessibility actually becomes boring,
Well,
to where you're not having as much fun.
to a degree, I will say that the number one complaint I've seen across the board, I've probably seen 30, 40 people in guild complaining about it. I've seen people complaining about it in open chat. And it's one of my biggest nitpicks, one of my biggest quality of life features that I love that they added to retail and they've added to other games as well, which is the phasing for nodes,
Yep.
quest items, and NPCs like bosses where you can tag it and everyone gets credit. Because there is nothing more annoying. If you watched our live stream from the first night, Nathan and I played all night. There were some really epic things that happened. First and foremost, that boat rush of everyone like it was like a wave of zombies like going onto the boat and then coming off the boat. Having that clipped is just I am so happy that we were there to experience that because that was pretty epic. But then spending 30 minutes trying to get a boss mob in a cave that we needed for a quest when there's 50 other people at the same time trying to do the same thing and no one wants to form a line and everyone's just AoEing the shit out of everything because they're trying to get their credit and get out. That is a super annoying feature that I kind of looked at and went, this is the one of the few things I'll look at in Classic, and you see lots of other people complaining about that. That is one of those quality of life features that modern games have to consider having, even if they do adhere to old school mechanics, because that is the kind of stuff that will drive people away in droves. And that's one
Yeah.
of the things where I think we can start to look at what are some of the lessons that we can take away from World of Warcraft Classic that can apply to current games in development that are old school. Um, because I would say that this isn't proof positive, but it is a good case study, World of Warcraft Classic, for the fact that people do enjoy a game that has lots of good content with plenty of group content, i.e., dungeons and heroic modes and raids, and no matchmaking system. But it also is a game that has a big enough population that can support not having a matchmaker in the game. Because I think Asmongold and some other people have talked about and I agree with them. Like one of the downsides to a low population game not having a matchmaker, or if you could look at it like this way, if you're playing a horde guy on a server where there's no horde players, and you're trying to get a group together, and you're waiting 2 hours because there's no other horde people to group with, that's gonna suck, and you're gonna want a matchmaker for those scenarios. Whereas if you're on a healthy server and you play an alliance side and everyone is alliance and you can find tons of groups, then that's not going to be an issue. Um, so I would say some of the things that we can look at that we know are working are group-based gameplay, lots of fun sort of PvP, challenging content. I know somebody watched one of my videos from the dungeons, from one of my Wrath dungeons, and said, "Oh, that looks like it was easy mode." And I was like, "Yeah, because we're running on normal mode. Try
Yeah.
that on heroic, and you're gonna get your face stomped every single time." Um, anyway, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a big draw for World of Warcraft has always been, and I think this was why so many of the copycats didn't make it, is that they purposefully chose a an art style. Now, whether they knew it was going to age well or not, I don't know. But they did purposefully
Ah,
choose an art style that uh, it allows them for even low grade computers to run the game smoothly. And for example, when you click an ability, it does it. And if you're playing classic and you click an ability and it doesn't do anything, it's not like other games you just start smashing it over and over. You know there's something wrong. You've lost connection to the server or something bad is going down because it like Todd always says from Bethesda, it just works. The game just works. And I think that that is a big, huge factor for this game and why it smashed the competition back then was because more people could play it because it ran on a lower end computer, even back then. Definitely does now, but even back then it did. And it worked smoothly. You got good frame rates. You got everything in the game is just super intuitive and works the way you would expect it to work.
Man,
And
you just touched on something, Nathan.
okay,
Um, I got to trigger off of this. I got to
okay,
riff
all
off
right,
of
all right,
this. So performance, because I've said this in the past. Performance of World of Warcraft is unlike anything I've ever seen. It is
oh yeah,
flawless performance,
unbelievable.
flawless optimization, and the fact that you said that it can run on any systems. I want to point out a game that has already launched in the past, and it's a game that failed because it was so horribly optimized, and that's
Yeah,
Vanguard Saga of Heroes. Because everyone likes to talk about the fact that, oh yeah, Vanguard, sold 350,000 copies, et cetera, et cetera. They also seem to forget that within the first 3 months, that game had dropped to less than 20,000 people playing the game because no one could run the game because it was an unoptimized piece of hot garbage. And I still, to this day, think that Vanguard Saga of Heroes was the best MMORPG I've ever played.
mm,
But, even saying that, I recognize that it was a hot piece of garbage, and I
yeah,
built myself a PC because I was in the alpha for that game. So I built a PC that was capable of running it like a hot piece of garbage when it was in alpha, so that I was still able to run it relatively well at launch. But I was one of those lucky few. Now I'd like to flash forward to current games in development. One of the greatest challenges facing an independent team, whether or not their game is going to make it, which is the theme of today's episode, can these old school MMORPGs that are being developed today make it? The number one challenge facing all of these teams is
mm,
going to be optimization and
mm,
performance because
it
they
is.
have a hard enough time coming up with a budget to cover programmers, writers, and artists, let alone develop all the content that they need to put into a game to retain a certain amount of players to keep the lights on. But they also need to be able to have great engineers on staff who can optimize a game so that it's playable on many machines. And I'm allowed to say this now because it's not me saying it, it's lots of other people saying it. The game that I was previously involved with, Saga Lucimi, which is now called Embers of
Hmm.
Drift, is in a hot garbage state when it comes to performance. Unless you
Yep.
have a 3090 Ti, you are not going to be running that game with anything more than maybe teens. I believe you're on a 3060, I think, maybe.
I'm a 3060. Yep.
And you were saying that when you weren't streaming, it was okay unless you were in like a city or a populated place, right?
Yeah, and then on my end, it would drop to probably 15 frames per second. Was probably the worst I've seen. But on the stream end, because OBS is trying to process and this uh, nightmare, the stream was seeing it maybe 5 frames per
It
second.
was bad, yeah.
It was bad.
But
Yeah.
I will also say, if you go to their forums and read their forums, you're going to see a lot of comments from people that say they just can't get more than single frames, and they even created a potato mode for their
Yeah.
game, which drops. It turns off all the grass, turns off all the shadows, it turns everything off so that you're running this basic wireframe structure to get the game in a runnable state. Now, not everyone cares about graphics, but here's the problem. How many people out there who are so going back to the Vanguard scenario, I was probably in the top 1% of gamers who was willing to go out and build a machine around that game.
Sure.
And that was a game by a celebrity status, by Brad McQuaid, so I was willing to do that. How many people are going to go out there and are going to be willing to build a machine around an indie title from an unproven
No.
development team?
Yeah.
So,
No.
not very many people.
Not many.
Let's say
There'll
you
be a
get
few. There'll be a few.
yeah, there might be 1,000 people who have a 3080 or whatever the case may be who can play your game with a reasonable frame rate. But how many, the other 99% of the people who play your game, are going to be running a 980? I'm on a 1080. Why? I mean, why not? Like 1080 runs all the games I want to play fine. I have an Xbox Series X if I want to play bleeding edge graphics for something. I don't need a massive graphics card
That's
because
the average gamer, by
that's
the
the
way.
average gamer. And so
Yeah.
if you're asking from an independent development standpoint, if you're asking your gamers to need to have a $1,700 graphics card to run your game when it's an independent title, I think you're facing an uphill challenge because you're
Sure.
asking people to spend way more money to build a top of the line machine that only professional streamers are likely going to have, when the average person isn't. That's a big challenge for any
before,
independent team.
and they have to spend that money before they can enjoy your game.
Yes.
So for all they know, your game is trash. And I'm going to be honest, and this, I love indie developers. I think that I just respect the hell out of them. But to be honest, the average gamer, as soon as they know it's an indie team, they expect it to be a low value product. And the reason why is there's so much of that they've already experienced, right? Where it's like it's an indie team, therefore it's not a high quality game. So they're going to be expecting that. So to expect somebody to go out and spend thousands of dollars just so they can play your indie project is really low. It would be more likely, but still lower, if somebody like Bethesda and or Microsoft or someone huge had a game, and maybe those aren't good examples for quality. Actually,
Star
if somebody
Citizen.
like Nintendo, right, like a big company had a game put out that you expected quality from, then maybe there'd be more people. But still, it would be low. A lot of people just be like, well, my rig can't run that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna play it then. But
By the way,
problem
this is why I don't play Star Citizen yet. Even though
Right.
I have it, I won't play it because it runs like shit on my 1080.
right.
Not to
Yeah.
interrupt you, sorry.
No. That's exactly the way most people are going to look at it. And the other problem they're going to face is just simply people finding that out, okay? People don't like to admit that their rig sucks, first of all. All
like a
right,
shame
thanks for that, by
feature.
the way. Welcome, TBKU, first-time chatter.
Hey, what's up?
But yeah, the other problem you face is that most people won't admit they have a bad rig. They're going to load up your game. They come from playing whatever games they played before that ran pretty good or good enough. They're going to come into your game to try it out or see somebody else try it out. It's going to run not good, and they just don't want to play it anymore. To be honest, the average person, as soon as they see it running bad, they lose all interest in the game immediately, and they'll go back to wherever they came. And that, I think, is the largest hurdle that indie developers need to overcome. Is that game needs to run smooth, it needs to work properly, it needs to feel, as far as controls, frames per second, reaction to when you click something, it works, UI, nice and clean. If they have that from the get-go, that first impression means a lot. Because if, for example, you have somebody huge like Asmongold, or whoever, insert big streamer here. They come in your game, and their first impression is pretty good. Like, they're like, wow, this looks good. I like, whoa, I'm getting good frames. This is really reactive combat. They immediately start saying nice things, because they're reacting on the fly, right? These are real humans, and they're actually reacting with their emotions, with their facial expressions. Dude, a ton of sales will come from those first 20 minutes of that streamer playing that game, because tons of people will wait for their favorite content creator, their favorite streamer, etc. to try, especially an indie product, before they decide, am I even going to spend a dime on this? You will make a ton of sales just off of them being impressed that it runs good and smooth.
And lest anyone claim that I'm picking on Embers Adrift because of my past association with that team, this also applies to Pantheon, Shroud of the Avatar, other games. Shroud of the Avatar had a lot of issues with
I'm sitting here talking about Pantheon, to be honest. I'm talking about Pantheon, because Embers Adrift, by the way, Rimfo, supposedly, and if super chats and funding goes good this week, then I'll be able to do it. But supposedly, someone in my chat came and said that Embers Adrift has fixed the stutter issue that it had, and that I should go back and play it this coming Saturday. So if I can afford it, I will. And we'll see. I don't see how they could have fixed it that quickly, unless they already been working on it for a while, and now the new client is here. But we'll see how that goes. But I just wanted you to know that, because I didn't know that. I just heard that last night while streaming. Somebody told me that.
Well, performance is going to be the biggest challenge for all these indie teams, because it's also a challenge for games like Star Citizen, which is not an indie team. I can't play their game, and even in its current state, and because it hasn't been optimized and it hasn't been polished.
Sure.
And I understand that it's still in an alpha state, and that's fine. But for indie games who are asking to people to pledge to their title and then you do pledge for $50 or whatever it is, and you get in and you can't even play the game because you're running a 960 card or a 1060 or a 1080, and you're getting single frames per second, and you feel like you just wasted $50 and they don't have a return policy because they don't want to give you your money back. That's
Yeah.
fucked up, and that's going to be a big issue for a lot of these indie teams. So performance, looking at like World of Warcraft, any indie game out there that's going to do any sort of pledge packages, but even beyond pledge packages, just the launch product, looking at what happened with Vanguard Saga of Heroes, performance has to be a major, major, major focus for these teams. And the reality is, and I'm like you, Nathan, I would be very interested to see if they did fix the stutter in a single week, because as far as I'm aware, they don't have a graphics programmer on their team because they can't afford it. And that's most indie teams. They don't want to spend the money because a graphics program is going to cost you $120,000 a year on the low end. And they're going to need 2 years to be able to properly optimize your game if they're working from scratch. I've yet to see any. I mean, even Shroud of the Avatar. Shroud of the Avatar had one graphics programmer on their team. And he was very good at what he did. He'd worked on some very good titles, some AAA titles. He was very good at what he did. But even Shroud of the Avatar, with all the polish that he did to the game, was still not a very well optimized game.
Yeah,
it was not smooth. Like, I would maybe get 40 frames per second on peak performance. And
I played it with a similar set to what you got now, by the way, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
And in towns, I was definitely not. It was less than 30 frames per second in towns, and outside 40-ish. Maybe 50 in some cases, but it was playable, and that's the key. It was playable, but it wasn't World of Warcraft where, like looking at what we experienced the other day, Nathan, when we logged in at server launch, how many hundreds of people were on getting onto the boat, and like
that was nuts.
It was fucking.
I'll be using that clip every time I mention like performance or like networking, dude. That is my go-to clip I will show, because that was insane how many people were pouring out of that boat.
And that was one phase on our server.
I was getting perfect frames. It was like nothing. I didn't even know that many people were on the boat because I was getting such buttery speed. You could tell there was a lot. Everybody's crammed on that boat. It looked like maybe a couple of hundred were maybe there. Dude, it must have been. It had to at least be 1,000, didn't it? Didn't that at least?
I think it was 6,000. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was nuts, and not a single dip in frames. Now, my stream started dipping when I started moving out into them for whatever reason, but I didn't see, me playing the game, I didn't see a single dip that entire
I've noticed
time.
that as well, and I think it's an issue with that thing in the background that option that we have to set with Classic, because when I've been doing my replays, going back and watching some of the videos that I've been cutting together for the dungeon runs, I'm seeing choppiness in the recordings, but I'm not seeing any choppiness when I'm playing the game. So it's like
it has something to do with it rendering it, and I'm gonna look into that and see what's going on, because it drives me nuts when it does it. Because I don't even know. I'm just playing the game like Lottie. I don't look over and chat's like 5 frames per second. I'm like, oh, come on, man, why?
So performance is the number one thing
and then
indie teams, but then there's more.
Let's say you nail that. And then
let's say you nail the performance, which, by the way, performance is the last thing on the list, but it's the number one thing in my mind. Even though it's the last thing on the list, it's the number one thing because it's the first impression component. Because let's say that you do, and I will roll into the next topic, but I want to wrap up with this real quick, because we've all seen by this point. I riffed on it. Nathan riffed on it. We've all seen the Asmongold reaction to the Pantheon video where he, in his over-the-top way, was like, this is the worst MMO I've ever seen. He's reacting in an over-the-top way, but he's reacting in a natural way to footage that is not meant to show the game in its current state. It's not polished, etc., etc. But the reality is your 99% of gamers are going to react the same way if they log in and your game is hot garbage. And I'm going to call bullshit on this every single time. The people who sit there and say, well, we don't want those players in our game anyway. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Because they keep the game running so that you can play it, because games need subscriptions. And your little hardcore niche community of 15,000 players is not going to be enough to keep
pay the bills. It's not going to pay the bills. You're not going to have a game. You'll be on a private server that takes 7 years to develop. You know what I'm saying? Like,
AKA
more. Like,
Deathguard Emu.
Exactly, dude. I'm not. They bust their ass for that server, and I really appreciate them. and I'm not trying to make fun of them, but I'm just saying, like, is that the position you want your MMO to be in? Because that's what happened to Vanguard. And I think the entire industry, I know Pantheon for sure, think about that game and its launch every freaking day, right? That was what got Joppa even wanting to get into developing games. Was he was there for Vanguard and was so pissed. He actually went off on Brad McQuaid. Brad McQuaid, like, you know how Brad McQuaid talked to the players? He'd pull them and he'd talk to them and, get their opinions on the game. Joppa actually went off on him about, like, dude, how could you dare release this game in this state and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's how Joppa and Brad McQuaid met, and that ended up over time developing a relationship where he brought him on his team. But so that's Vanguard is just a great example for what you don't want to launch your game in. But after the performance is good, let's say you nail that.
Yes. Now we get into okay. Let's say that you have enough money to get a graphics programmer to get performance nailed down, which is going to be the last thing you do before you launch your game. But let's say you get it done. It should be being done along the way, but it's the least important thing. It's the polish component.
Sure.
But it does need to be happening along the way so that you have less work to do at the crunch finish line. The next important thing is the amount of content that you have available to the players, and this is probably in my mind. Even though the performance is the most important in my mind, because you need a game that's going to... So, before I spin off on the content thing real quick, I want to bring this up because I just played through the starter island that they added to World of Warcraft recently. A couple years back. Sure. It's called Exile's Reach, I think. Now, because I was intimately involved with the Shroud of the Avatar team during the development of that game, because we had staff members who were working there as well as on our title for Stormhaven Studios... I got to go into their offices a few times back when they still had offices, when they had a 40-man team before their game fucking tanked. And what was very interesting to me is that one of the quick priorities for Shroud of the Avatar became refining that initial new gamer experience into the game, the newbie island experience, so to speak, that first 5 to 10 hours of gameplay, and trying to make that as smooth and as polished and as tasty as it possibly can be, because you're only going to get 20 to 30 minutes before someone's going to... These are the Steam players, by the way. The Steam gamers are the ones that are going to buy your game. If they're not hooked within the first 30 minutes, they're going to ask for a refund on Steam, because they can get it within 2 hours, I think it is. So you've got to be able to provide them with a really polished play experience within those first 30 minutes. And then you have to be able to continue that for the next 5 to 10 hours for them to feel like they're going to invest more time into your game. However, as important as that is, how are you going to retain those players?
Yeah.
The only way you're going to retain those players is with vast amounts of content. And this is a thing I saw come up in conversations over and over again when I was developing Saga of Lucemia, was how can you expect me to pay X amount of dollars for your game when I can pay the same amount or less for a game like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy, and I'm going to get 10 years of content
AAA.
and AAA quality polish for your game that's only going to have 10 zones and maybe...
But you want the same amount of money.
But you're asking for the same amount of money. How can you justify that?
Where's the value? Yeah, where's
the value in that for me? Not only that, but also the consumption of content. Because I'll be honest with you, I've been playing fairly hardcore. I hit 74 today on my Death Knight. I played all night Monday night, all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday, and a good chunk of today. I've been putting in about 10 to 12 hours a day into... So let's say I'm 50 hours in to Wrath at this point, and I've only gotten 4 levels. So if that holds up, it'll take me about 100 hours to get 10 levels. That's a pretty good chunk.
That's good. That's a whole game.
That's a whole game.
So that means you got your box price, which there is no box price, but there would have been back in the day.
Correct.
So I would have
gotten my box price from the leveling experience alone. Then I get into in-game, which in and of itself is another 100 hours of gameplay or more.
If not more.
And then on top of that, I get into the achievements section of the game, which is the mounts and the fishing pools and the brew fests and the secrets. That's another 500 hours of gameplay for the hardcore. But let's just say between
and then you got PvP. Maybe you don't like it, but
other people do.
Lots of people do. Yeah.
So A game like Warcraft is providing a player with, let's say, arguably 300 to 500 hours of gameplay out of the gate with a
Sure.
$50 box price. Here you have an independent team which is being developed by, instead of a 500-man team, it's being developed by 10 people, arguably. Let's say if
Okay.
you have 5 world builders and 5 artists, you've got a 10-man team building the zones and the dungeons and the content, everything else. And then you have your writers and everything else, and your narrative designers and all that other stuff. But let's say there's a dozen people focused just on that, and you've got a 30-man team. That's a good size to have dedicated to the development of the world. You know,
Sure.
10-man programming team, 10-man world building, you know, other stuff, management, all that other stuff. Can these independent games realistically create enough content to keep a player retained for 300 to 500 hours? I don't think
Yeah.
they can, and that's a
Yeah.
place where the expectation of the player will need to be scaled back,
Sure.
knowing that it's in a title. However, are the 99% of players like Asmongold going to be willing to scale back their expectations for an indie title? Go. Sorry to
Yeah,
rant for a little bit.
yeah, that's really good. And here's what I think. This plays completely off of everything you just said. I think, first of all, an indie team can do it. However, there's a cost for it, and that is the amount of time it's going to take to develop. It's going to be hefty. It's going to hurt, right? And if you're an indie team, you're probably kickstarting and/or crowdfunding of some sort, which means your freaking player base is going to seemingly shrink as time goes on. They're going to be like, I'm tired of waiting, blah, blah, blah. They'll be back. When the game launches, they'll be back, right? But you're going to have that problem, which I think Pantheon deals with big time right now. I think it's their biggest hurdle is the amount of time it's taking. But here's the deal. In my opinion, just like we were saying with how long you have to show that your game runs good, you have a shorter amount of time for that.
Yes.
Content's going to be the next thing on a player's mind, right? And in my opinion, you got to pour some love into those starting zones. Because if, for example, and Asmongo was just talking about this recently, actually, if you see these points of interest in the background as you're running around in your first couple of hours, you're like, ooh, what's that? I'm too afraid to go right now. I'm too low level, but I'm going to go check that out. Ooh, what's over there? Oh, I'm going to go see that. That looks really cool. Oh, what about that cave? Oh, what about this? What about that lighthouse over there? Oh my gosh, I see a boat go by. Can you get boats in this game? Those beginning moments are going to hook the player for months. Or not, right? So if you got them, if you got really good points of interest, and I'm talking about especially for your starting zones, and there's more reason than just hooking the player at the beginning. Hooking the player first impression is super important. So I think those starter zones need to have a ton of it. I mean, just oozing with like, this is a freaking adventure. But not just for the beginning players. Yeah. Also for when you want to make an alt. Because that's where you hook people. When they like going back to these starter areas and redoing it because it was really cool and fun, and they missed out on things because there's too much content for them to even do with one character. Man,
or
it's gravy.
What I've seen with World of Warcraft is providing players with multiple avenues, like we did with Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King, so that I can level 2 different characters and see 2 different routes each time because I take different zones and still get to the same level. But you just touched on something. I'm going to be very interested to hear your opinion once you've gotten deeper into Embers Adrift, because one of the number one issues that I've heard, and we've seen it in their videos and their screenshots, Pantheon I don't think is far enough along for us to make a statement about because they haven't entered into a public testing environment, whereas Embers Adrift can. And again, for context, because things can't be taken out of context because of me being in my past association, so I have to make sure that everybody understands. This is not me that is saying this. This is what people have said on the forums, and we've seen these comments made on social media, is that one of the major issues, and this ties into the fact that their performance is so dismal, the zones are completely empty in between the points of interest. And so they might have these massive zones that look really pretty from a screenshot perspective, but when you actually start running through those zones, you find out that there's vast open empty spaces in between the tower in the distance and the fishing docks, and that's a problem.
And there's no reward too. Like, we found that me and Xenix were playing together, and this is a limited experience here, guys. one time playing the game.
Sure.
But we did see points of interest like, oh, that is cool. But I think you just did what I accidentally did.
I have clicked to move. Click. Yeah, I've clicked to move
me
on
too.
and it I keep hitting it.
I did the same thing just a second ago. But anyway, we saw places that were good points of interest, and we ran to go see them, and there's nothing there. Literally, not even a mob. There was literally nothing there, right? And so then what happens is then they feel like, oh, this isn't that type of game. I'm not rewarded for exploration, so I'm just not going to do that no more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you just lost a lot of points with all the nerds. And here's the deal. It's a fantasy game, so there's a few things to be expected. Really cool castles, towers, lighthouses, creepy-looking bogs, and, all these things that are classic in fantasy genres are going to be exactly what your player base thinks is cool. So it's up to the developer to put those in the game in such a way that it draws the character. Because you only have a limited amount of time for them to decide, am I going to continue playing your game or not? The more you can make them feel like, well, I can't quit playing this game yet because I saw all these other cool things, I want to try those out, the longer you retain that player. And eventually, over time, it takes a while for the general player to feel this way. They say, you know what, this is my main game. Like, I have the most fun playing this game, and, it's my main game now. And then you win. The more people that main your game, that's how you win. That's how you get, like Final Fantasy 14 did it by just pumping the content out. I mean, just at such a massive pace compared to other MMOs that's how they did it. There was hardly time for you to take a breather and walk away from the game because right around every corner, there was more content coming out. And Final Fantasy 14 ended up, at least at one point, surpassing World of Warcraft, which everybody thought was impossible and would never be done. Of course, there was other things going on, but that's how they were able to do it. They just had a ton of content, man.
Yes, I think Elder Scrolls Online does a very good job of that as well.
Yeah, it does.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Aya, who's TBKU from the guild, Aya and guild, but TBKU and Discord were saying, I think she was referring to Elden Ring being very good in that, in the sense that anytime you looked on the horizon and you saw something you could go to and there was something cool there, and also cool things to do in between there. I think that's a major issue that every independent developer is facing, on top of the performance issue, is the fact that they have to be able to create enough content to keep players invested in the game, especially considering some of these indie titles are expecting you to not only pay a box price, but they also want you to give them a subscription. And holy shit, if you're asking me to pay a subscription on top of Netflix and Hulu and HBO Plus and Disney Plus and my Lotro subscription and my WoW subscription and everything, you want me to pay a subscription to your game? You better be able to provide me with hundreds of hours of entertainment for those dollars, because if you can't, I'm going to just stick with the ones I know can provide me with that entertainment, which are WoW, Lotro, Star Wars Old Republic, the same games I've been cycling through for the last decade, because they continue to provide me with high quality entertainment. So lots of good content is key, performance is key, and I think the next thing we can look at is mechanics. And this might be where you and I start to
probably
diverge a little bit, because one of the things that I think there was a disconnect with certain hardcore Pantheon supporters who didn't quite understand what I was getting at in my reaction to Asmongold video. I was in my video explaining to people that you want Asmongold to like your game, and the only way you're going to get Asmongold to like your game is if you start to improve the graphics, get performance under control, but also provide players like him with, because he was nitpicking on some things that it's hard to tell from those videos because they're so old. Supposedly the Co-Carnage stream coming up is going to show some new footage, which would be interesting to see what that looks like. But I know one of the major turnoffs for a lot of people...
Still will be missing a lot of things he was complaining about, though.
What's that?
I said, even with the Co-Carnage stream, I mean, their animation team's just now starting to rig it.
Oh yeah, it's still gonna be rough footage.
It's not gonna make him happy yet.
For guys like Asmongold, it's not gonna be enough. But what I want to get at,
finished product.
Yes, he, like 99% of other gamers, need that finished product before they're going to be, because they don't give a shit about the vision.
Right.
They don't give a shit about Brad McQuaid. They don't give a shit about any of this stuff. They want to know, does it look good? Does it play good? Does it have fun features and fun mechanics? And one of the things that I was commenting on my video is that if they don't want to embrace the niche, which they keep saying they don't want to, they keep saying we don't want to be known as niche. We want to be, well, we want to have, and that's because going back to the numbers we were talking about at the very, very, very beginning, if you want to break away from that 100,000, 150,000 peak audience, 150,000 sales that are going to buy your old school game, that's not numbers that I've made up. Look at Crowfall, look at Shroud of the Avatar, look at other old school and MMORPGs. They've all peaked at like 120,000 sales. So there is a ceiling to how many old school people you're going to get to buy your game. So if Pantheon wants to break through that ceiling, they have to be willing to modernize. And that doesn't mean, and this is where there was a disconnect with some people who are watching my reaction video, that doesn't mean they have to throw out their tenants. It doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean, as an example, a lot of people have taken the death mechanic that they wrote about on their website a couple of months back in their newsletter.
Taken as a gospel.
They took it as gospel and said, wow, that's the mechanic forever. And it's like, no, dude.
It even says, if you just read right below it, this is how it is now, and it's subject to change with testing.
It's a pre-alpha written idea that's going to change through pre-alpha, alpha, beta into launch, and then guess what, guys? It's probably going to change after launch, too.
I would be shocked. I would be shocked if it's exactly the same. I don't think it will be. I think there will be a punishment. Now, here's something that, if you follow Pantheon, no way can you deny me on this. They say it. Brad McQuaid said it, Joppa says it, Bim Dean says, everybody says this almost every time they talk about a feature. If it's not fun, we will change it.
Well,
if it's not fun, we will change it, because our number one objective is for everything in our game to be fun. If it's not, we'll change it.
The key factor there, though, fun for who? Because that's going to be the trigger point. If you're only building it to be fun for that 150,000 ceiling cap, then you're going to be stuck with that. If you want to make it fun for 300,000 people, 500,000 people, then you have to start to be able or be willing to modernize some of these features. And this is going to be the pressure point for some of the old school people, especially when it comes to things like the death mechanics and the slow-paced combat, not wanting things like scripted encounters and things of that nature. Those are things that modern gamers are, if they play a game that doesn't have a scripted encounter and it's just tank and spank and it's just like turn-based gameplay, they're going to go somewhere else because it's going to be way too boring.
Me too. I can do it some, right? You know what I mean? Like, I can do that some. That's fine. But if I start to realize that's it, that's all there is to it, I'm sorry, guys, I'm out. Like, I can't devote hundreds of hours to just literally doing the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, I can, but I won't want to. If I realize that's the extent of your end game, and that's it, it doesn't go any further than it. I mean, what's the point then? You know what I mean? Like, what's the point anymore? It's not even going to be rewarding anymore to get through it, because then it just has to do literally with nothing more than gear score. You know, how great's your gear? Even if you don't have a gear score, it still will be that. Like, how good's your gear? And do you know your rotations? And if you do, then there you go. Then you pass the new raid. Dude, that people are gonna munch and crunch and chew their way through that so quick that your game will be over. You need mechanics, at least to top end. I'm not saying you can't have tank and spank for open world bosses, for a couple of bosses on the lower tier. Sure, yeah, but then you're also going to have that big mean boss that everybody has to learn the fight and everybody has to do the fight correctly to get past it. You got to have that.
All right, hang on one second. Sparrow was sending me a tell for another character. Sparrow song. There we go. All right.
But that's always been the vision for Pantheon, right? To take old school, classically spirited MMOs, but modernize it in such a way that it feels old school, but respects your time. That's always what they've said.
Oh man, respecting of your time is. I love the fact that Asmongold mentioned that in his video because when I did an MMORPG analysis video like a couple months back about respecting players' time, and that was literally the title of it. So when he said that during his video, I was like, oh my god, that is exactly a major point. And Maduros has talked about this a lot during our morning streams as well. Indie games, woo, achievement, 250 fish. If you want players to spend money on your game, to continue playing your game, and to put your game at the top of the list of games that they want to play, you have to respect the player's time and their money. And punishing the player with mechanics that are old-fashioned for the sake of being old-fashioned is not the way to go about this. I made this comment the other day. If you look back and say, let's look at the original hand-cranked printing press, the Gutenberg or whatever it was called, the printing press, right? You had to hand set each individual letter. You had to hand set all the type. You had to, paint the ink on it. You had to manually put the paper in it. Then you had to manually crank the press, and then one page at a time, do it all over again, right?
Yeah.
Innovative for its time. We didn't know any better. We didn't know that it could get any better.
It was the best we could do.
It was the best we could do. Flash forward to where we are today. We have touchscreens, auto-loading bays. We have, you can print thousands of pages per hour, and it's all automated. You can do color printing. You can do all of these major things. The modern-day printing press is a thing of wonder and of science and innovation. And at no point in time does anyone really want to go back to the hand-cranked press days. However, there are always going to be hand-cranked enthusiasts who will swear that the feel of the paper, the smell of the ink, the touch of the paper, the way you crank the press, all of that makes for a better experience. That's the 150,000 player cap that we've talked about. It's those people who are like, we only want it this way because it's old-fashioned and we appreciate the artistry of the old-fashioned and everything. And there's nothing wrong with that except when it limits your game from actually doing big things. And at the end of the day, regardless of what title we're talking about, we want these games to become more than just a footnote in the history of Kickstarted games that have been developed. And that means trying to find ways to modernize your features to get beyond that 150,000 ceiling and maybe break some boundaries and sell 500,000 copies, which is something that even Vanguard Saga of Heroes couldn't accomplish. But that was also 15 years ago, and the audience is much bigger today than it was back then.
It is, yeah. And I think what you're saying is true. You do have to find a way to modernize it in some way. Now, do you have to take away the soul of what that meant and why it was so impactful back then? I don't think so. I think you just have to find a way to where there's an alternative or something for the situations that we've learned since those mechanics were made that are problems, right? Such as maybe the person got disconnected and that's why they died, right? And so the death penalty, that's going to be 1 out of 100, right? Or even maybe 1 of 1,000. But you have to consider these things. So we've learned, and we've all been in this scenario where these things happen, and you don't want somebody to rage quit over it, right?
The funny thing you just mentioned is saying that those things have to be considered. Because if you read some of the comments from the hardcore purists, they literally have come on my videos and said, that's bullshit. Those people shouldn't matter because it's never going to happen, and you should be able to... I had one guy tell me that even if your kid was like screaming bloody murder and had like cut their hand off and was like needed to go to the hospital, you should still be able to put auto follow on someone and get to a safe spot before you take your kid to the hospital. I'm like, you need that mentality right there needs to fuck right off, because
dude, at that point, let me tell you something. Regardless of the death penalty, right? Forget about the freaking death penalty at that point. When there's a big emergency, okay, gotta go, guys. Whatever happens, I'll deal with it when I get back, right?
Yeah.
If I'm dead, I'll deal with the consequences, whatever. Come on, let's be honest here. But what I will say is this. They're obviously... I'm going to go into death mechanics because I feel like that's the biggest, touchiest, juiciest.
It's the low-hanging
sore.
fruit, yeah.
That's the sore you want to punch at, and everybody does and wants to talk about because that's the big one. And I will say this. The death penalty that Pantheon's offering, for example, and the Embers Adrift has currently, where you drop your stuff, right? And In Embers Adrift, that's it. You got to, for now, they say they're going to figure something out. For now, you got to get your stuff back or you lose your bag. You go get a new bag and just lose your stuff. Pantheon's similar. You drop your stuff, but you get to keep your equipped items and, everything you have on you in both games, right? But you got to go get your stuff back. Or in Pantheon, they say there's going to be the alternative where you can go pay someone in town. There may even be some classes that has some abilities to do it themselves. Whatever. But you can get your stuff back that way. It's going to cost some money. And Pantheon's saying there's a chance, they haven't given percentages or anything, there's a chance that something in your bag may be missing when you get it back, right? Maybe some coin, maybe an item. Maybe it was something really good and it's going to hurt. I don't know. It's all random, apparently. And I gotta say that although that is pretty harsh, I think it's pretty fair. I think there'll be a little bit of balancing and tuning done. I think it will change. And I was going to say that that feels very niche, but I don't know if it is. And the reason I say that is, once again, old school RuneScape, most popular, millions, 5, 6, 12 million people. I mean, it's a ton of people play that game. It's an outrageous amount of people. That's their death penalty, except for they only have 15 minutes to get their stuff back. And if they don't get it in 15 minutes, they can still get their stuff back, but then it costs even more. And it's substantial. It's like 10% of the value of everything you had.
I will also say that, like, and I always
they love it. They love it. They're like, yes, this is perfect for our game.
I hesitate to bring single-player games into the conversation because so many people like to say, oh, Elden Ring, sure, this, that, or the other, and I'm like, that's not an MMORPG. It's not the same thing.
First of all, there's not a harsh death penalty in Elden Ring, guys.
Not only that, but here's the thing.
You don't even have to run that far. It's
my controllers are a little dusty because I haven't played like a week. My Xbox Series X, people are like, you can't save your progress in Elden Ring. Yes, you can. My Xbox Series X, I can literally shut the whole thing down into hibernation mode, walk away, come back, turn it on, and pick right up from where I left off. So you cannot tell me that it's the same thing in a single-player game because it's not the live experience. So that's why I always hesitate. However, I will say this. Playing Minecraft with my little nephew on Saturday nights, he is terrified of death because he died and lost all his stuff. Because when you die in Minecraft, you lose it all. It all goes away. Now, it's not an MMORPG, but it is a game. Then you can play it on creative mode and not die, and you can adjust the settings. And we just have it on normal survival mode right now, which means you can die and lose all your stuff. As a result, we always play it very cautiously, and he doesn't like to go outside of the house very often because he's terrified of losing his stuff down in the depths of the mines of Moria. Because he fell. We were going mining one day, and he fell. Like, he fell down a shaft and, like, fell for, like, 10 seconds and then went splat in the middle of nowhere. And it was like, yeah, dude, sorry, it sucks. And he totally had, like, a 6-year-old rage quit moment where he was like, I don't want to play this anymore. You're going to have a certain amount of people who will rage quit. But like you said, there are games like RuneCraft which prove, at least from a certain perspective, that there are a certain amount of people who do enjoy, or at least will put up with that.
Put up with it if the rest is good enough. Yeah.
I am old enough now, and I've done it long enough where I am very hesitant to want to dedicate to a game. And I'll be honest with you, I think I've even mentioned this during our P99 streams. There have been a couple of times when I have died. If I wasn't playing with you guys and I wasn't doing it for content and getting paid to be there, like, I love all of you guys immensely that I play with, but at the same time, it's also content for my channel, which means I'm getting paid to make the content. If it wasn't for the friendships and the fact that I'm doing it for a job, I would have given up on P99 months ago because I would never play that by myself. Why? Because of the death penalty. The death penalty is too much. I have way too much other shit to do with my time. It's way too hardcore, and it doesn't take into consideration, like, if I'm on the boat, look at how scared we were to go to Kunark because the boats weren't working. And then even on the way back, like, Bounty got, like, stuck in a, and thankfully he could gate out, or maybe it was Skinny, or Vendini, because he could port out. He got stuck on the boat, and everything. I was like, there's all these things that are out of our control that can cause my character to die and lose a level and lose all of my gear, and there's no recourse for that. And that is like, no, I'm not going to put up with that. Like, yes, Pantheon is going to have options, but I am still on the fence about that, of going, well, it's great to have options, but I'm definitely in the ballpark of I need to know, because this happens to me a lot because of where I live. I need to know that if my power goes out or if my internet goes out and my group, and I can't get back online that night and my group has to leave, and I log back in tomorrow morning and I'm in the middle of a dungeon and I get immediately swarmed and I die, I should not be being penalized for that in no way, shape, or form. Someone had suggested something like, well, maybe there's a thing where if that happens and you're offline for a certain amount of time, it auto teleports you back, and I'm like, yeah, but how do
People
they
would, but hey,
abuse it?
yeah,
It's the
you can't.
abuse.
Yeah, there you go. People would abuse it if that was the case. They'd see, oh, I'm gonna die. Let me just rip my Ethernet out of the back
Yep.
of my computer. I
Yep.
would do it too. I'm not gonna sit and pretend like I wouldn't. The only reason I might not is because I'm streaming. I'd lose the stream. That would be the only thing
Hmm.
that would stop me from doing it myself if that was how it worked. Now, I will say this: Minecraft Old School does say we're not even gonna count it unless you're online, right? So the 15-minute thing, if you're not online, it doesn't even count. So you got but when you log back in, the timer starts again, right? And even with that system, and that system's super harsh. 15 minutes to get back to your body, no matter where it's at, um, and get all your stuff back. And I don't even think you have your equipped gear in that game. I could be wrong. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you do. It's like you're naked. And then check this out: if you die again, going to go get your corpse, all your stuff goes to your original corpse. So now your new stuff. So if you went to the bank and got some stuff out, and then you're on your way to your corpse to try to get back, you die again, you don't just get to get back to that point to get that stuff back. It all goes back to your original corpse, and now it costs even more money to get.
Oh
If
man.
and your timer is still ticking. You know what I mean? You still, whatever time's left, it does not reset. It does not reset that 15 minutes. So that's pretty brutal, and I think that's probably the most brutal that is doing well for a death penalty, because that game does really well. But here's the deal: old school RuneScape gets away with it because, and this is weird for me to say because I don't play that game, but the rest of the game is so good that people are willing to say, like, yeah, I'll put up with that, even though it pisses me off when that happens to me, because there's no way that don't piss somebody off. But the rest of the game is so good that they're willing to say, like, and they even respect it. They even say, like, yeah, I like that there's a hardcore death penalty because it means something and it makes me behave differently when I'm out adventuring, etc. Because I know how serious it is to die. Therefore, I'm not gonna do really. I'm not gonna Leroy Jenkins. I'm gonna play this game in a respectable way, and I'm gonna be scared of those mobs that are a couple levels over me. I'm gonna have an escape plan, etc. for all these situations before I put myself in them. And now these dungeons, these places, these bosses, they're 10 times what they would be in a normal MMO, where it's just die, no big deal, run back and try again. Everything in the whole world, every accomplishment you do, and every single thing you try to do is magnified. And I think it's worth it, but your game better be really freaking good besides that. That's how I feel about it.
I will also say I'm gonna respond to this Discord real quick.
I think we're coming up on our time too.
Well, I'm waiting for Joey to log on, but yeah, we're
Okay,
we're,
that's
we're
a good
getting to the
point.
point. We can probably start winding down in the next 10 minutes or so. Um, I'm of the opinion, and this is why I don't agree with anyone who says that Warcraft as an example. I will say that I'm not talking about Warcraft retail here. I'm talking about
Sure.
Warcraft Classic, World of Warcraft Classic. Anybody who says that the death penalty here doesn't hurt doesn't know what they're talking about. I will point blank out and say that because it might sound like it's easy, but when you have gone into a dungeon and you are repeatedly failing on that encounter, you are now wasting time because it's a 10 to 15 minute recovery time every single time. Not only that, but the coin costs in Classic are punitive because you don't earn a lot of money. And when you start having to repair purple gear and it's costing you 20, 30 gold a pop to repair, it starts to be very, very, very punitive in terms of the way it feels. Now, retail, that's a different story. I will absolutely agree that retail, you earn so much coin that coin cost doesn't feel like it stings at all. And so there's really no sense. But the ghost format, like you have to run back, or you take a major hit to your stuff and you have a 10-minute res effect where all your stats are nothing. So you really can't. It's just take the hit, go away, take a dump, make a sandwich. You know, that's your death penalty. I find that that's fine, and that doesn't need to be stricter than that for me. For me, as a modern gamer, I feel like that's punitive enough where even if I just don't want to deal with the corpse run component of it, which is the ghost run where you got to go back. I've done this in retail. I died the other day, and I was like, you know what? It's a good time for me to take a break. I haven't stood up for 2 hours. I'll just pay to get it back. I'm going to go AFK, do some jumping jacks, go to the bathroom, hang out with Chris for a few minutes, get another cup of coffee, get a snack, come back 15 minutes later. I'm good to go again. Now, when we're doing it live, if you've ever been here when we've tried to stream some of these new dungeons, we're dying 2 or 3 times, and each time it's a 10-minute recovery. You're losing 30 minutes. And anybody who says that losing time isn't enough of a death penalty, I'm going to argue until I'm blue in the face that you don't know what you're talking about, because the number one most valuable resource any human being on planet Earth has is time. My time is more valuable than anything else on this planet. And so when I have to lose time because I'm facing something that's too challenging for our group, or because we haven't figured out the strategy, or we're being stupid about our pools, I find that to be plenty uh, challenging enough in terms of the risk versus reward. I don't need someone slapping me in the face with, oh, well, now you're going to lose an item, and by the way, you're also going to lose some XP, and on top of that, we're going to make you lose a level. And I'm like, no, at that point, that's one of the things that's making me very nervous about the as it is written death penalty for Pantheon. It's the one thing that would make me not want to play Pantheon is their proposed death penalty. Now, if they refine it and take away a lot of the what I view as the stupidity old school mechanics, and they make it, because I designed the death penalty in Saga of Lucemia as an example. So I like the idea of your equipped gear stays on your body. Sure. Whatever's in your inventory is lost unless you go back and get it. There's no XP debt because there's no XP. There's no experience points. There's no levels, so you can't lose a level. It's just the equipped gear versus the gear in your bag. Whatever you're equipped with, you're always going to have, so that doesn't matter. It takes a durability hit. You'll always have that, but did you have anything important in your bags? The only thing that challenges you to do is to be a little conscious about your resource management and think about, well, before I go on this adventure, do I want to take anything important with me, or did I get something really cool on the way out of that dungeon that I really want to make sure I make it back to town with? And that adds a certain risk versus reward component without forcing you, because there is no, I did it again, there is no mandatory corpse run in what they're now calling Embers Adrift. It is an optional thing, because you're always going to have your equipped gear. You don't lose that, which I think is the same thing that they do in Pantheon, or that they're proposing to do. However, in Pantheon, they're also adding XP loss, level loss on top of that.
Well, yeah. Supposedly. So I think the XP will stay, and I think it will be a not so bad your first time on that level, a little worse on your second time you die that level, etc. I do not think level loss will make it to launch.
I don't think it should. So. I think that's a really...
I don't either. I don't think there's anybody in the community that I've ever talked to who wants that to stay. And I don't think it will stay. I think that'll be taken out. I think it'll be drastically different, but there will be a penalty. You know what I mean? Like, you will feel it, whatever it ends up being. And I think that's important, because there's something the MMOs don't do anymore, and that's create memories. We can play World of Warcraft. We've played it for a while now. We've made some memories, like off the dock, all the people running. There's not a whole lot where I would just, in the middle of a conversation, be like, let me tell you about these things that happened to me in World of Warcraft Classic. I love World of Warcraft Classic, but the same things that happen to me happen to almost everybody that plays.
Yes.
For the most part. There are things, but when you have things like the death mechanic where you gotta, for example, cool things that are player-driven can begin to happen, right? Like setting up a business that is, hey, you know what we do? We help you get your shit back. That's what our guild does. We are a corpse recovery guild, right? Call us when you need your corpse back. Pay us some money. We'll help you get your stuff back. It's cheaper than it would cost for you to pay the guy. Plus, you don't lose your stuff, and we'll help you go get your stuff back. There's just cool things that can happen. Now, your game has to be popular enough, right, for those kind of things to even be plausible. right? And that's a whole nother
Oh
conversation. But
yeah, population.
because the population sucks, then everything I'm saying it makes no sense anymore, right? Because it's just not going to happen. You're not going to have people to do these things.
I
But
like
I just think
Maduros'
it
comment.
creates memories. Like Drac has stories he tells, like where people can drop some, whatever it's called here on Twitch, where they can drop the channel points and they can say, tell us an MMO story. Tons of his stories that he laughs about now and tells enthusiastically are horrible things that happen to him, or having, or just having to use other people to get out of a
Well,
horrible
I will
situation.
also say that Maduros just made a comment on that very subject in chat, which I think is very valuable to this conversation. I don't have a single good memory dying in retail EQ during the first 3 expansions. I would
All right,
categorize them as
I would
terrible
agree with that.
moments, which are memorable, so
Yeah,
they stick
but
with us,
bad.
but not in a good way. And that may be
Yeah.
the Drax situation as well. We can laugh about
Now,
them now,
yeah.
but
Now I agree with that actually, and I do think that EverQuest corpse runs are straight up not good gameplay mechanics anymore. I understood why they put them in the game back then, and I respect it. But when I think of death penalties, to be honest with you, in an MMO that hurt really bad, I'm usually either referring to Final Fantasy XI or Dark Age Camelot, which their death penalty was way less severe than that, right? But they were still, dude, they hurt. Um, so I want to make that clear. I do not think that old school P99, for example, like lose all your things, you're butt naked, you got to run back. That is not gonna fly at all. People will quit your game. Period. Like end of story. Nobody's gonna put up with that. Or you're gonna have 1,000 people playing your game.
yes, and that's going to be we're going to be talking about that on another episode as well. This is probably a good point to wrap up, Nathan, because we're about
Yeah.
7:20 and we're about 10 minutes out from getting going for the static group. We had a really good topic tonight, so I would urge people continue thinking about this. We're going to have this up on YouTube on Saturday afternoon for those of you who want to continue the conversation with us there. We continue to have good conversations in the comment section of YouTube. So if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, down there is where you want to drop those comments. But also make sure, thank you very much, Maduros. We're having a great time with this show. It is one of the core components of this show is Nathan and I being willing to challenge each other with opposing viewpoints. We haven't gotten to anything that's super, like, we haven't butted heads too much yet. It will be coming down the pipeline because we have some really juicy topics that are coming up that we've gotten quite heated about during some of our live streams. So make sure you stay tuned to that. But I don't think it's very good to be able to do it from a friendly perspective of us knowing that we're brothers in arms, and we can have those conversations from a safe place of knowing that at the end of the day we respect each other's opinions, even if we are different on those opinions. So I want to say first and foremost, shout out to Nathan for being willing to put himself out there like that and have these types of conversations for the good of a fun show. And also all of you for being willing to put forth opposing viewpoints as well so that we can have good conversations around them.
Absolutely.
Every Thursday, 6 p.m. Central is the game plan for this show, and then on Saturday afternoons, probably around 5 or 6 in the afternoon, I don't have a schedule quite yet, they'll be coming out on YouTube. So here's the bookkeeping stuff as we get to the end. If you're on Twitch watching this live, make sure to follow, and if you want to support us, you can do a subscription or bits or whatever you want to do here on Twitch. This is a partnership with myself, Nathan, Sparrow, Bounty Code, my brother, my wife, and Skinny, and you can catch us live on Sunday nights playing the Weave in the Void campaign. That's the major reason that this channel exists, and everything that we're building with the world of the Weave in the Void, which you can find more information on over at patreon.com/wandering hermits. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you can get updates in the future. And now the big thing. Every Thursday, what we do after this is we go into our multi-stream. We're going to be playing World of Warcraft Classic live, myself on YouTube, Nathan on YouTube, Sparrow on Twitch, along with Maduros and Idrador, playing through Wrath of the Lich King. Tonight is a special night because Wrath just launched, so we're going to be playing an all-nighter session, or as late as we can go. We'll see how late we actually make it tonight, so hopefully we'll be tuning in for that. And I know Nathan and I in particular, it's the end of the month, so if you've got super chats, help these two broke streamers get their bills paid for the month.
Yeah.
We both have some pretty significant goals that we want to hit tonight, so hopefully we'll see you over there supporting accordingly as we get going and onwards and upwards with the things we do over there. And of course, don't forget, if you want to join us in World of Warcraft Classic, we are on the Peggle server Alliance side, so hopefully we'll see you in game as well. Anything you want to add to that, Nathan?
No, sounds good. And don't forget that Sunday on this channel, Sunday night, we'll be doing our Weave and Void playthrough, which is a 5th
Episode
edition.
3.
Yep, episode 3. You might want to come back, join that. We're me, Renfell here, Sparrow, Bounty, Skinny, and who am I forgetting?
Chris and Joey and everybody, yeah.
And Joey and Chris, yes. We'll all get together and we play some D&D, roll some dice, and it's a lot of fun. So come back to that too.
All right, folks, thanks so much for hanging out with us tonight. We're rolling into our streams for Warcraft, so we'll see you over there here in a few minutes. And until next week, stay safe, everybody. Happy fishing.